Okay, and whenever Daniel, you're ready, the floor is yours.
I'm trying to, cause
You know how to share a screen?
yeah, I'm just getting the file right now because
Okay.
I have to download it. And then yeah. Okay, cool. Um, that's fine. Mm, okay, let me think I got it now.
You have a PowerPoint or something?
Yeah, it's a PowerPoint. It's a PowerPoint.
Okay.
Just pulling that up. Where did I put it? Yeah, my bad. My bad.
It's okay. I doubt anybody else watched the debate for the 7th Congressional District of Virginia last night. Did anybody else watch? Probably most of you don't live in the 7th District. I think it's more of the suburbs of Richmond rather than the city of Richmond.
All right. Okay. All right. I think I got it now. Hold on. You move that right there. Damn.
You're still looking for the file?
Yeah,
Okay, here we go.
I can see it, right?
We can see it.
All right, cool. So, essentially today I will be talking about raising the minimum wage to $15 and why I'm for that. So, I guess just to provide context, basically the whole idea concerning like minimum wage and stuff like that really like started back in like the early 1900s with the advent of like sweatshops and stuff like that, where basically like women and children were working with no price floor at all in terms of how much they were making. So basically, like what the American Association for Labor and the National Consumers League, what they did was they rallied together, and that was predominantly a group led by women, and they basically tried to notion for like to set a legal minimum wage, and that's that initiative for them really started, I think 1909, and basically they were introduced at a state level first before it ever reached a federal level, and basically in 1923 is when they actually set minimum wages or actually it was in 1923 where they tried to deem minimum wages unconstitutional, but a few years later, Congress adopted the Fair Labor Standards Act, and which basically instituted that federal minimum wage and stuff like that. So basically, constitutionally, minimum wage was allowed past that point. So basically, we see that minimum wage is not solely just an economic issue, but it's also a social issue as well, and that's where a lot of the arguments we'll have here will be kind of tied in. So generally speaking, minimum wage can just be defined as like a minimum amount of remuneration that employer gives to pay the wages of workers perform during whatever period of time that they're doing in terms of their labor and stuff like that. And the only purpose for a minimum wage is essentially to address worker poverty and inequality, and so they want to fight against like impractical levels of low pay. And since economies seek to operate at maximum efficiency, the minimum wage that we're also trying to attain should also do the same thing. So, like stated earlier, minimum wages were historically set with the purpose of addressing poverty and inequality. Right. All right. So when we look at minimum wages and stuff like that, to look at what an effective minimum wage should be, it should be able to afford the protection of the workers. It should be able to cover the needs of the workers and their families, and it should also be able to allow employers to comply with minimum wage regulations. So we see that in order for them to move in the best or the most efficient way possible, these are some of the things that we have to take into consideration. Currently, as we speak, the federal, well, my bad, let me go back. All right, currently, as we speak, the federal minimum wage is $7.25, and this is just a small diagram as to where the minimum wage has either been set higher than that, at the same amount, or lower than that, or in places where there is no state minimum wage. As you can see in Virginia, our minimum wage rate is actually $7.25. We see that a lot of other states across the country have higher minimum wage rates. barely any have lower minimum wage rates than that, but some do have no state or minimum wage law. So that's where the federal rate would kick in and set a precedent for how they should go about setting their wages, right? So currently speaking, right, when looking at the cost of how we should set these minimum wages, or the cost of living, right? Because that's essentially the main reason as to why someone might want to even increase the minimum wage, right? So when we look at it, these systems are essentially meant to hold on, quick 2 seconds looking at this. Yeah, my bad. So essentially, looking at the this diagram and stuff like that, you see that here in Richmond City alone, right, the cost of yeah, Professor, I keep getting the notification to admit Myron into the waiting room. Should I just like leave that alone, or you got it?
Yeah, I can do it.
Yeah, it was kind of popping up on my screen a lot. But yeah, so essentially, right, looking at the standard cost right now with minimum wage workers, right, we can see that even by if the cost of living for a two-parent, two-child family, according to the EPI or the Economic Policy Institute Family Budget Calculator, right, for two-parent and two-child family is $79,870 per year, right? So we see that that's the average cost for average two-parent, two-child family. However, even with $15 per hour with both parents working 40 hours a week, that cost, the amount of money that they'll make prior to taxes will be $62,000 and $400 per year, right? So we see that on average, right, even a minimum wage rate of $15 alone falls even short of being able to manage and facilitate the needs of a two-parent, two-child family. So with that having been recognized, we can see that even as time goes on with the Raise the Wage Act on the floor and being pushed by predominantly Democrats, this is an issue that would actually have to be taken into great consideration, just because of the fact is that if the minimum wage of $15 might not even be enough to cover that, then most certainly here in Richmond at least, then the $7.25 minimum wage rate would most certainly not be able to manage the expenses of a two-parent, two-child family. And oftentimes we can see that the main people who are actually working in minimum wage jobs are discriminatory, like, or what's it called? Are predominantly women and people of color. And this is primarily due to the fact that obviously, as we know, that in our current wage market, women are paid significantly less than men. And with them being paid these rates that they are being paid, it essentially makes it a lot harder for them to be able to manage the cost of living in a society where the cost and the standards of living is constantly increasing. However, with a minimum wage of at least $15, which we might even need to push higher than that, it'll provide them with much more stability to live in this society compared to $7.25 minimum wage rate. And further speaking, while minimum wage workers are frequently characterized as mostly teenagers or younger workers, that stereotype is generally false, because among workers who would actually benefit from a minimum wage increase from now all the way up into 2024, the average age for those people is like 35. So most low wage workers are not so young, and there's actually very few teenagers who generally work to begin with. So a minimum wage increase currently right now would generally affect 91% of the workers receiving wages of ages 20 and older, and 68% would be at least of the age of 25. So we see that the typical worker in a family who will benefit from minimum wage increases is actually the family breadwinner. So generally people who are making the most money in their family to carry the most significant part of their financial load and stuff like that. And that would be having them earn on average about 52%. And those are the people who actually earn about 52% of the family's total income. And in addition to being older, these low wage workers are more likely to as I stated before, be women or a person of color. And that 725 would generally hurt them as well as Black and Hispanic workers and other people of color predominantly. So nearly 50%, 56% of people who would benefit from this minimum wage rate, this increase in minimum wage to around $15 are women, despite women only making up 48% of the total US workforce. Furthermore, because we see that our economy does disproportionately pay low wages to anyone apart from white males generally, minimum wage rate would actually even the playing field. And since the main goal of a minimum wage is to level out the playing field in terms of inequality and poverty, increasing the amount that people can get paid at a minimum would increase that, would take more people out of the poverty threshold essentially. Let me see. Move to the next one. Okay, so generally speaking, these are just some few points that I had here, so I'm gonna elaborate on these. So obviously we see that raising the minimum wage does increase the average income of low wage workers, lifting many out of poverty. It does decrease racial and gender income inequality, especially since most of the low wage jobs are low wage workers are people of color and women, and it increases the standard of living for many. Just how kind of like how we spoke about universal basic income a few weeks back is if low wage workers were to receive an extra $1,000 in addition to their low wages and stuff like that, it'll increase their spending capacity to be able to inject more money into the economy, which is beneficial for most people just because of the fact is it allows them to have to worry about have to worry less about how they're going to make ends meet, and as opposed to constantly having to shift their the brunt of their payments and every single thing they do towards their just their bills and stuff like that. So we see that it increases their spending capacity, increases their ability to live and their standard of living, and it does something about the fundamental issue of race and gender income inequality, which is to basically level the playing field. And that's why generally we see that Democrats are primarily the ones who are fighting for this increase in minimum wage, while it's generally the Republicans who fight against it, because this is more of a more liberal idea, realistically speaking. But there are downsides to minimum wage an increase. So we see that a minimum wage can cause job losses. And this is because of the fact is that with increased prices that'll reflect on the cost to increase the pay of workers and stuff like that, it could cause customers to generally take their business or take their association with businesses that have increased their costs to places that do have cheaper prices. And that'll mean with losing customers, these places will also lose income, which could result in businesses having to lay off workers because of the increase in minimum wage. And generally speaking, in terms of the amount of people in the workforce in and of itself, a $15 hourly wage or more can basically lull people into staying at a role for far too long, which essentially allows them to it reduces people's new entry into entry level positions, because of the fact is that a lot of the jobs that are currently paying minimum wage rates are places that aren't necessarily designed for people to start a family with. So, for example, McDonald's pays a minimum wage of $7 an hour and 25 cents. These are not places that generally people come into in order to raise a family. These are just entry level positions. So, if you raise the wage to $15 an hour, it'll encourage more people to stay there and be comfortable, as opposed to seeking upwards mobility in terms of their economic position. So yeah, I mean, this is it for, I guess, my quote unquote opening statements, and I guess I'll let Zaid go so we can move on to the rebuttals and stuff like that.
Okay, thank you. All right, 10:21 already.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
I was wondering if I can share my screen from my computer while I still have my audio on my phone. It says it's disabled still.
I can make you both. You here twice, so I'll make you both co-hosts.
Okay. All right. Can you see the PowerPoint?
Yeah, now we can.
Okay. All right. So my name is Zayd Chipa, and I'm going to be arguing against Daniel, and I'm going to be arguing against the minimum wage being $15 an hour. So an increase in the minimum wage would force businesses to lay off their employees, and it would actually cause a rise in the unemployment levels. So the Congressional Budget Office projected that a minimum wage increase just to 1010 from 725 would result in a loss of $500,000 jobs. And I saw another fact or projection that said that it would lift 900,000 people out of poverty. So I'm not really sure exactly how it would work at $15. I think it would be closer to like 3 to 4 million jobs that are going to be lost. But I'm not really sure if it would pull more people out of poverty or leave more people jobless. So also in a survey of 1,213 businesses and human resources professionals, 38% of employers who currently pay minimum wage said that they would lay off some employees if minimum wage was $10.10, and 54% that said that they would decrease hiring levels. And again, if this was to $15, which is an $8 pay hike rather than just $3 difference, I do think maybe more than 50% would start to lay off employees, and maybe 80% would decrease hiring. So let me see. So, okay, raising the minimum wage would also increase poverty. A study from the Federal Reserve Bank of Cleveland found that although low-income workers see wage increases when the minimum wage is raised, their hours and employment decline, and the combined effect of these changes is a decline in earned income. So they could be working at $7 an hour. They could probably be getting, let's say, 20 hours a week. They'd still be getting more pay than if they were working much less hours with more pay. Because, like, let's say if you double the pay, their hours are going to get drastically reduced, maybe by more than half. All right. And a minimum wage increase would hurt businesses and force companies to close. So the vice president of White Castle said that if it was $15 minimum wage, they would be forced to close about half of their stores and let off thousands of employees. I think that's just too much for a big company like White Castle to have to let go of so many of their employees and even close half of their stores. So that just shows you how detrimental it is to not increase the price of the minimum wage to $15. And raising the minimum wage would also increase the price of consumer goods. A 2013 article by the Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago stated that if the minimum wage is increased, fast food restaurants would pass on almost 100% of their increased labor costs onto consumers. So all that money that they're paying, like, if they're paying their employees more, they're just going to charge you just as much to make that money up, basically. So you asking for a higher minimum wage is just like you asking for higher price burgers. A 2015 study found that raising the wage of fast food restaurant employees to $15 per hour would result in a price increase of 4.3% or a reduction in product size by 12%. So you can expect your hamburger to come with one less bite in it. Teenagers and young adults may be shut out of the workforce if minimum wage is increased. One sec. Let me go back real quick. So ahead. Okay. Dr. Mulligan, economics professor at the University of Chicago, stated that the teenage employment index fell sharply after the minimum wage increase of July 2009. And that was a fall of about 8% in 3 months, while the previous drop took 8% over a year. And that 8% drop in the teenage index is actually huge, because in the next study, they found that people that were experiencing unemployment at an early age, so let's say that 8% right now, if we were to increase the pay hike for minimum wage, a lot of people would be losing their jobs. Yeah, those experiencing unemployment at an early age have years of lower earnings and an increased likelihood of unemployment ahead of them. So it's kind of just like a domino effect, and it'll be harder for us to recover if we end up going through with a decision that would possibly just have people jobless for years and years. So raising the minimum wage would disadvantage low-skilled workers. A study by Jeffrey Clemens and Michael J. Wither found that minimum wage increases result in reduced average monthly incomes for low-skilled workers, $100 less during the first year following a minimum wage increase, and $50 over the next 2 years due to a reduction in employment. So even though they're getting paid more per hour, they're getting less hours. So for the first month on average, they make $100, or for the first year on average, they're making $100 less per month and $50 less per month for the next 2 years after that. Dr. Dorn says that a 10% increase in the minimum wage leads to a 1 to 3% decrease in employment of low-skilled workers in the short term, to a larger decrease in the long run. So over here, I'm pretty sure that's just a 10% increase that leads to 1 to 3% decrease in employment. And we're looking to change this number to 100% increase in the minimum wage. So that could lead up to 10 to 30% decrease in employment of low-skilled workers. And if they're saying it's going to be a larger decrease in the long run, then I don't know what sort of effect that would have on the economy. And if the minimum wage was increased, companies may use more robots and automated processes to replace service employees. So simple tasks will be threatened in an industry that employs 2.4 million wait staffers, 3 million cooks and food preparers, and many of the nation's cashiers. I think that speaks for itself. The jobs are going to get taken by autonomy eventually, especially if they're simple tasks. So if we raise the minimum wage, they're just going to find quicker reasons to get rid of humans and start to move to autonomy, I guess. And here's my, should I wait for Daniel to have his rebuttals and then maybe?
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah.
If Daniel has something he wants to say.
Yeah,
I was gonna maybe ask him to wait too, but I think you already gave some of your cons, but still. Do you have something, Daniel?
Yeah, I was just gonna say that despite all of the points that he made and stuff like that, right? If we're going with the historical reason as to why minimum wages were set and for the purpose of as to why they were created in the first place, if we're going to look at that, which was the goal was to reduce worker poverty and inequality, then increasing the minimum wage is the most feasible solution and the solution that actually deals with the purpose of as to why minimum wage was created in the first place. So we can see that even back in, I believe that even Zaid had this statistic himself and whatnot. So like the purchasing power of the federal minimum wage did peak in 1968 at $1.60, which would be $12 in 2019 dollars. And if that minimum wage actually had kept up with labor productivity growth, it would have reached $19.33 here in 2017. And we know that our federal minimum wage is nowhere near that. And in the same year, the CBO did also release a report that increasing that minimum wage would benefit nearly 17 million workers, which would at the cost of 1.3 million people losing their jobs, right? So we will see that even in that situation, small sacrifice for large gain. And we even see that in addition to that, right, one economist, Arindrat Dubey, was talking about how in his study on the American Economic Journal, Applied Economics, He's talking about how like raising the minimum wage rate significantly would reduce the amount of American families that are below the poverty line. So if the main goal of the minimum wage is to reduce people who are impoverished and to reduce the level of inequality between the citizens who are making the most money compared to the citizens who make the least money, then even raising the minimum wage to $12 an hour, the national minimum wage would pull an average of 6.2 million people out of poverty. You know what I'm saying? So even if that can pull 6.2 million people out of poverty, then how much more a $15 minimum wage rate? So that's just kind of some of the thoughts that I had concerning it. If you really want to address the reason as to why minimum wage is created, increasing it would be the best option in terms of that. So.
Okay, thank you. Zaid, do you want to continue from there?
Okay, so I don't think that it would help lift more people out of poverty, because let's say for example, we're at McDonald's and we're both employees there, and there's a total of 5 employees. Let's say we all get paid $7 an hour. Even if we're 5 employees, that would only cost $35 an hour to McDonald's to pay us. But let's say at $15 an hour, there's only 3 workers. You and I got fired. There's 3 other workers that are getting paid $15 an hour, but they're still paying $45 an hour to pay those 3 employees. Not only do you have less productivity because you have only 3 employees now, you also increase the pay hike. So now they're going to have to make up for labor costs, and they're going to move those costs straight to the consumer. And there's less people producing the items. So I just don't see how you shifting to $15 would help more people get jobs, because half the people are going to be losing their jobs. Even if 3/5 of the people are gaining income, their hours are going to be reduced because McDonald's can't afford to pay $45 an hour, one, and their consumers will be less likely to buy products when they've been so used to a certain price for something. They're not going to be buying the 2 for $8 fish fillet. You know, they can't just shift it up because all of a sudden the U.S. government wants to change the federal minimum wage, and a lot of people are saying that it should also be like run by a free market rather than the government. The government should not be choosing what the minimum wage is in a certain area. It should just be based off of supply and demand in a certain area. But I'm not really sure how that would be implemented if the government is really taking control of these things.
Okay. One little point, I think you said something that maybe mischaracterized Daniel. You said, I don't understand how you could think it would increase the number of jobs. I don't think he said that, right? He did acknowledge that increasing the minimum wage would be decreasing the number of jobs available. I think both sides agree on that. The question is it worth it? Is the amount of or fewer hours, either fewer jobs or fewer hours? So Zaid, your example of 5 workers at McDonald's going down to 3, that's a very good point. Every firm that faces a higher cost of labor is going to decide how to adjust their employment levels to make their new, make it maximize their profit. But I think actually that's not a point of contention. Both sides, it's not that one side thinks that you'll increase the labor and the other side thinks it'll decrease. Am I right? I don't think Daniel ever said that this minimum wage would make people hire more, right?
I think he was saying that it would decrease the poverty rates. But
yes, he did say that.
I think I had done some research and it actually showed that it would increase the amount of people that weren't.
Okay. So, you're saying overall, the overall effect will be to keep more people in poverty rather than fewer.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's definitely a good point that a lot of people seem to make. Do you want to go to the rest of the class? Does anyone else have any comments or questions?
Could I make one more closing remark though?
Oh, you have a closing remark. Sorry, go ahead.
Same.
Well, okay, so I mean, overall, and in addressing whether a minimum wage increase is worth it or not, we have to look at how all the minimum wage, or how increasing the minimum wage would affect all the other aspects of our society. For example, people increasing the minimum wage, which would take a large proportion of people out of poverty, would also reduce crime rates. Let's look at it like that. A lot of people who commit crimes solely because of the fact that they're impoverished and they don't have the means of making it through legal measures. So if you increase a person's ability to take care of themselves and provide for themselves and their families, and to invest in their own future and stuff like that, it also reduce crime rates, which would potentially allow more people to have access to more people to take part in our society, which would potentially keep more people out of prison, increase the amount of people willing to inject into the economy, and so on and so forth. So realistically speaking, increasing the minimum wage, it increases a person's standard of living, the way that they'll go about being able to participate in our society, and especially within our economic sphere. And it'll just ultimately reduce poverty, reduce racial and gender discrimination in terms of those discrepancies when it comes to pay, because we know that most of these people who who make those amount of money are people of color, who are generally put into those situations by unfortunate circumstances. And despite the fact is there are potential job losses that can be incurred by increasing the minimum wage rate, the pros outweigh the cons. And
Okay. By the way, Zaid, are you done?
No, I think I have one more slide, but
Oh,
I was going to talk about why it might not be too bad, but I actually disagree with Daniel right here when he said that it might actually reduce the crime rates or the poverty rates. But I think the crime rates would increase because the overall income that's coming in to one single person, before when the minimum wage was $7, they were still making more money because of the amount of hours that they had than when the minimum wage would be $15 and their hours are less than half of what they had before. So overall, they'd have less income and more incentive to go out and, make bad decisions for money. But you said that the minimum wage in 1968 was $1.60, and the equivalent of that in 2016 was $11.16. And if you adjust it for 2020 inflation, which we printed 22% of the total supply of US dollars this year, that would still sit up around $12 an hour. So I will deny the $15 an hour. I would probably be okay with $11 to $12 an hour, because I think it would have too much of an instant impact for us to start shifting towards $15 an hour. My proposal would have been that maybe biannually or annually we increase the wage by $1 or 50 cents until we reach $12 an hour. And then we could just adjust for inflation from there on.
okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, good job, both guys. Oh, there's more.
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
There is more, but I'll just say the quote from The Big Short. Brad Pitt says that for every 1% increase in unemployment, 40,000 people die. So the reason that we can't really just experiment with all these, let's just try $15 an hour in this area, let's just try this, it's because so many people would be losing their jobs, and you're actually playing with people's lives when you're making decisions this big, especially if it's a federal minimum wage, and let's say half the people lose their jobs and half the people keep their hours or get reduced hours. I just don't think that it's worth it if we're deciding on other people's lives to increase the price wage. That'll be all for me. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. A lot of stuff from you guys. Let's see. Oh, here we go. Does anybody from, wow, it's already 10:41. Anyone from class want to ask something or bring up something that hasn't been brought up before quickly? Ask a question or have a comment? I had a few comments. Yeah, so I think it's pretty easy to make the case against a minimum wage increase because of the unemployment, right? I mean, if the reason for a minimum wage increase is to help people who are poor, and the evidence shows that actually it increases unemployment for people who are poor, or at least low skilled workers, then you have to wonder, why are you doing it at all? I don't know. I think maybe in a bigger scale, we have to talk about doing this together with other sort of anti-poverty measures. If all you do is raise the minimum wage and you say everybody who loses their job, well, tough. You know, find some other way to survive. I do think that would be a sort of a cruel thing to do, wouldn't it? Something we didn't talk about at all is government assistance that exists for a lot of workers. And I watched a video once that was really interesting about Walmart employees on government assistance. It's amazing how many of their workers are on some form of government assistance, and they tend to spend that money back at Walmart, you know. And the question is, why is this happening? How is Walmart able to hire so many people at such a low wage, and make a lot of profit doing that? Of course, they want to give them as low a wage as possible, and the argument is it's because of government assistance that they're willing to do that. There's people who they're not being paid enough to live, but with the government assistance, it is, and essentially, it's almost like a corporate welfare here, isn't it? The government is subsidizing these workers for Walmart in a way that Walmart is benefiting. So I wanted to make one more sort of efficiency argument in favor of raising the minimum wage. It's to say you got to force big corporations to pay the people a fair wage for their work instead of relying on government to subsidize it. That's sort of inefficient. Actually, any money that the government has to raise is through taxation. And we spent a couple weeks talking about how taxes are inherently inefficient. They have to come from taxes don't just come from anywhere. They either come from income or sales or corporate taxes, and every way you collect taxes is inefficient. So for an economy to rely on a large tax base is actually not good. And it seems like one way to reduce that would be to say firms like Walmart have to pay their workers enough for them to survive without the government assistance. And that would be something more like $15 an hour instead of 7, 8, 9, 10. I know Walmart actually voluntarily raised their pay earlier. So maybe this video that I watched, it was probably, 8 years ago, and it's a little outdated now because some of the pushback against firms like Walmart. But that's a reason to raise the minimum wage, is to say corporations like Walmart have to pay their fair share instead of relying on government subsidies to pay for their workers. And okay, automation. There's no time to talk about automation. Less hours. Both sides sort of agreed that there would be fewer hours worked, and that I think I have a slightly different view of how firms work than you guys. I think firms are profit maximizers, and at every point every day, they choose to hire workers in such a way as to maximize their profits, don't they? Why do they, let's say, Zaid, you had this comment about McDonald's hiring 5 people.
Yeah.
Why do they hire exactly 5 people? It must be because those 5 people are doing something valuable for the business.
I think it might be efficient to have 5 workers. Maybe one's handling this area, one is able to do this while one's cleaning, and it's just a very efficient ecosystem, I guess. But if you have not enough people and they're still getting a total pay that's higher than all the 5 combined, you're not going to be as efficient, and you're still going to have to shift those labor costs into your products. And I just don't see how that could be worth it.
I guess what I'm saying is, maybe I've spent years of schooling being taught economics in a particular way, and it's hard for me to think about it in another way. But if you think of this firm as a profit maximizer at every step of the time. So when the wages are $7, they hire 5 people because it's the profit maximizing thing to do.
Yeah.
If you're going to say once the wage goes up to $15, they stop hiring as many people, there has to be some reason for that, because whatever the production of those people at $7, they're still going to be able to produce something for $15 per hour. It just may no longer be worth it.
Yeah.
I guess what I'm saying is, you need workers. Why? Because it generates a revenue for you, a profit. So maybe McDonald's will shift somehow. They will shift from labor to capital. What they'll do is they'll buy those touch screens. You know, have you ever been to a McDonald's where you don't actually order with the person, you just order on a touch screen?
Yeah.
That's what they'll do. They will shift their means of production to less labor intensive practices to more capital intensive practice. But it's not because you know, I can only spend $50 per hour on wages, and before I split that $50 to 5 people, and now I have to split it between 3. They actually don't care at all about how they split up their wage money. It's really just about the profits. But it's still a valid point. Increasing wages gives firms an incentive to hire less labor, but it's because of their profit maximizing choice of labor and capital may have changed. I guess that's what I'm saying. Yeah, and you talked about a price increase of 4.3%, but actually that's not that bad, is it? I mean, would you accept a price increase of 4% if it meant people could have a living wage? I mean, I don't think that's a argument that will win over people who believe it's the right thing to do to get it.
Yeah.
You guys
I
have
think I take that over the 12% reduced product size, at least.
Yeah. You guys have any other comments or questions about this?
I had a quick comment.
Sure.
I honestly, this has been the first issue for me where I've found that my raging liberalism has met an economic wall. But I think Daniel makes some excellent points in terms of the social issues involved, racial inequality, pay gap. And those are very important issues to solve, but I don't necessarily think that a raise in the minimum wage of this size is the way to solve them. It certainly would help those issues, but I think it would be more like a Band-Aid in terms of actually addressing the root causes. Whereas I think Zaid makes some excellent points in just the macroeconomic deficits that would be caused by this specific policy.
Yeah, I agree. You know, my representative in the 7th District of Virginia, her name is Abigail Spamberger, and she was asked this question last night, and her answer was she would support a gradual raise to $15 per hour with an exemption for small businesses. And I thought actually that's a pretty good answer, because really large businesses, they can afford it. They can afford to pay their workers more. They just don't, because it's profitable not to. In a lot of cases, you can't argue all the time, but a lot of cases, big corporations are making a lot of money and they're paying their workers very little. And forcing them to pay more against their will might be a good thing for the general welfare of the people. But for small businesses, that might not be true. You may actually be putting some small businesses out of business by having this $15 per hour. So I think maybe that does it. You know, I don't know how serious that legislation is, but if you had a minimum wage that had a lot of exemptions for firms with fewer than a certain amount of employees, for example, I think that would be an interesting, interesting compromise between these two policies. I don't know. Anybody agree with that? I guess I happen to like her. She's actually a very moderate Democrat, Abigail Spamberger. Okay, well, we're over our time. Does anybody want to give a post? Oh, here's the chat. Oh, well, whoops, I wasn't looking at this chat. They're all pretty recent, 1047, 1049. Maybe you guys aren't talking to me. You're talking to each other in the chat. Or are you talking to me? Okay. It looks like an interesting chat. Does anybody have a post debate survey? Are you now after the debate? Are you for, against? We had some undecideds. Let's make the undecideds decide. If nothing else, that will be, Colin and Michelle, you were undecided. He's going to go with against. How about you, Michelle? Are you still here? Ooh, against. But Kevin is changing to 4. Oh, you actually didn't answer before. Did you? Well, it's very close. I don't know who to say the winner is, but it's like whose line is it anyway? The points, the votes at least don't matter. I think you both did a good job. We will have our quiz on Friday. I might talk a little bit more about this sort of labor market stuff, and then we'll have the quiz at the end of class. How about that? Give you a bit of a review if you'd like, and then the quiz will just be the last thing we do for the week. Okay, I